Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased and honored to have Delegate Sam Rasoul with us today from Roanoke. How are you doing, sir?
I'm well. Great to be with you again, Woody.
Lots of changes this year. You have 15 new members on the Democratic side. What changes have been made in the House of Delegates as a result of that from your perspective?
Well, we've got 19 total new members. It's 1 out of every 5 are brand new, so it's certainly a lot of people finding their way. It's been very exciting to have some of the fresh perspectives. And we're very fortunate to have a lot of bright people. So I'm excited to be able to help them and to usher in kind of this new wave of energy.
And speaking of new waves of energy, I see there are 2 new caucuses. There's a future caucus I just read about. Talk to us about that future caucus.
Yeah, yesterday we launched a bipartisan caucus called the Virginia Future Caucus. And there's a national organization called the Millennial Action Project, which has launched 22 of these across state legislatures across the country. And what we are is a bipartisan group. If you looked at the picture, it's really half Republican, half Democrat. We're trying to figure out how we can approach some of these newer issues in a bipartisan way. So the gig economy, attracting and retaining new talent, figuring out what we're going to do with all the new technology that's coming out. But you know, we made 2 goals: have a good time together, and also to figure out how we can brainstorm around these issues. What we find is these old stories about how politics was done 30, 40 years ago, people coming together, getting to know one another. And those relationships, those bonds helped us to break down the tribes, you know, Republican, Democrat. And that tribalism has really hurt us.
And you've also created another caucus. I think it's called the People's Caucus.
The People's Caucus, that is a small group of legislators who are deciding not to take any contributions from what we call public service corporations. And, you know, all these public service corporations do a wonderful job of providing us with a variety of services, but many of us feel as though many times there's kind of a conflict of interest of us, you know, making the rules, but then again getting larger donations from these entities. So we want to be able to support our public service corporations, but at the same time realize that people want to know we're genuinely working for them.
Now, I'm sure you anticipated and predicted this wave election. Once you got those results, were your expectations geared up a little bit more than usual?
Yeah, it's certainly a little bit different. It is, you know, now all 100 of us seem to have some more relevance than we did before. And that was, you know, when we had the idea about the Virginia Future Caucus, it was not just I, but Delegate Chris Peace and I are Republican-Democrat co-chairs of the Future Caucus.
He's probably the grandfather of that group.
He called himself the chaperone. But it's people 45, legislators 45 and under. We're excited to be able to work together with him and about a dozen other legislators have already signed on, and there are 30 or so that are able to sign on. And this election opened the door for us to have these conversations even more in earnest, because there have been whispers for the past several years, but now we all see the benefit in it.
Let's talk a little bit about Roanoke County and the city of Roanoke. We were talking earlier about a major development there in terms of rail. Talk to us about that and how important that is.
Well, we're excited about rail coming to Roanoke at the end of October. We started rail service, and it's pretty cool to be able to jump on a train 6 a.m. And then by the evening I can be all the way up in Boston. And so to have that other alternative to be able to travel to New York, etc., is pretty neat for us. We've been pushing for some time, and so my family is even taking the train on Saturday, so we've been personally using it a lot.
So I guess it's also good for economic development in the valley in general.
Very much so. I mean, people want to be able to hop to DC very quickly, and now they're able by mid to late morning be in the DC area, conduct some afternoon business, and even hop on a train that same day if they want to come on back. So it's exciting. Hopefully we'll be able to grow that service as we move forward. A lot of great things, though, are happening in the Roanoke Valley that we're pretty excited about.
You've got a Virginia Tech presence there. You've got Carilion, the medical school. You've got the Brain Institute there as well.
Yeah, so now formally the Virginia Tech actually has a presence, and that is a campus of Virginia Tech now in the middle of Roanoke City. So we're pretty excited about that. Not only do you have the medical school with a variety of students, but there are going to be newer programs that they're going to have in Roanoke, and that's going to really help a lot of development for sure. What's really exciting is the Brain Research Institute. Dr. Friedlander and others have really grown that, and we have new construction because we're about to double the size of that, and that construction is beginning now.
How is Valley View Mall doing?
The mall's doing great. As a child who grew up in Roanoke, was doing really well, 80s and 90s, and like many malls, it kind of hit a lull, and then now over the past 10 years, it's all developed right around there. There's some new development around the Tanglewood Mall, but what I'm very concerned with or try to focus on is figuring out how can we have development in all quadrants and all parts of the city. Some parts of the city has seeing more development. Other parts of the city and people watching this know that the northwest and southeast quadrants are some parts of the city that we want to also add some attention to.
Is Advanced Auto Parts still headquartered there?
Advanced is not. We do have a fair number of employees, Advanced employees there. And even when we've had hiccups with, for example, Norfolk Southern relocating some jobs out, their full office building has now been released, and some new exciting things. We've got a new company bringing in new jobs called Power School, who purchased one local company and now has grown it, and they've taken over much of that building. So there are some exciting things. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Have a lot of work left to do, of course, but Roanoke really has come a long way.
You mentioned public service corporations, and of course one of the big ticket items this session has been a bill that would to some extent re-regulate, if you will, Dominion Power. What's going on with that from your perspective? I know 2 separate versions have passed each house. There's a major difference between those 2, but from your perspective, what's that legislation all about, and do you think it really re-regulates the electric utility industry here in the state of Virginia?
It's so frustrating for folks to be able to watch Virginia politics sometimes and to realize we are 46th in the nation, one of the worst in the country with regards to the influence of money in politics. And where people feel it the most are some everyday pocketbook issues like your utility bill, your electric bill. And we passed, and I've been on the record and I've called it what it is, what I believe to be the most corrupt utility law ever in 2015.
The most corrupt utility law ever.
Ever. We said, here are the electric companies, and there's one entity that oversees them, the SCC.
State Corporation Commission.
The State Corporation Commission. And we passed a law in 2015 to say, hey, for the next several years, you don't have to pay attention to what they are making. We artificially froze the rates at a high level, and unfortunately ratepayers, now we have studies and we've seen hundreds of millions of dollars that have been taken away from ratepayers. This is what frustrates people on the right and the left. And I made the case that there's a common thread between Trump supporters and Bernie supporters who are frustrated. We saw that in 2016, frustrated with the status quo and a system that's just not working for them. And so you see the votes on these bills are both Republicans and Democrats who are frustrated voting against some of these interests. Now this year, we're trying to change that law, repeal that. And so there's a fight as to how to repeal that and make sure that we can re-regulate, restore that oversight, refund all the money, and make sure that people can feel good about a system working for them.
Now there was an amendment on the House side, I believe, the Democratic leader David Toscano, in terms of what was viewed as double dipping by the utility. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and why you think it passed on the House floor?
Well, late last week, I think that there was a lot of consternation as it flew out of Commerce and Labor. Our leader and many others voted for that bill. And over the weekend, people were pretty upset. And they said, we've got to do something. And so this amendment came forward. What's significant about the amendment to prevent double dipping is this is the first time that anyone has ever, that anyone remembers a Dominion bill being amended on the floor.
The first time.
And so, you know, to think about that is certainly some significant progress. There's a lot of pressure. What was happening, and what this amendment did, because in the bill that has been set forward that the Dominion is in favor of, it would allow them to overcharge customers, take that money, invest that money, and then charge the customers again for the investment and make a profit on the investment. So you'd be paying more than twice. And I just think that it's just awful. Just another example of why people are so frustrated with a system that's not working for them many times.
And apparently the State Corporation Commission is still frustrated. I believe there was a 5 or 6 page letter sent detailing their concerns, especially in terms of their ability to continue to appropriately review the rates within a certain period of time. Because as I understand it, it could take up to 6 years to review the rates depending upon facts and circumstances presented to them.
It is. They're very concerned about a variety of things, and sometimes it's a little wonky, but the reality is that the bill as it stands now does not restore enough oversight. And it makes modest refunds back to customers, and it manipulates regulatory accounting. And essentially, the bill as it stands now, while it does restore some oversight, the frustration is that it essentially would say we're never going to have a refund or rate reduction again because of the way that the bill is set up. And for me, that's clearly unacceptable.
And of course, one of the major premises of the bill is that the utility is going to invest in the infrastructure, if you will, to make sure that we don't have blackouts or brownouts, that repairs are made expeditiously, that they're going to start using more renewable resources, if you will. Do those pluses outweigh the current problems in the bill?
Look, I'm not here to be anti-utility. I want our utilities to flourish. When the lights go out, we're all upset, and we notice it pretty quickly. But the reality is people need to know that these investments are made in their best interest and that they're cost effective. So there are several good things in the bill. The problem is why do we have to have all these things packed into this one big bill? Why can't we talk about restoring the authority, giving people refunds back, and making sure that there's good oversight, and then have separate conversations about renewable energy, grid modernization, weatherization. You know, it seems as though that we throw a few crumbs over here to distract us from some of the major issues. And that's what happened in 2015. In 2015, a lot of people were distracted with a little bit of solar, a little bit of weatherization, and it gave too much cover, and now we're regretting that. So we just need to make sure that, sure, there are some great things in this bill, but we need to do what's right for the ratepayers in the long run.
Medicaid expansion is back on the table. Apparently, there's a promise of a compromise, if you will, and a recent bill that passed suggests that a compromise may yet happen. That bill imposes a work requirement now on the current recipients of Medicaid. How do you think that furthers the discussion, and do you see Medicaid expansion happening this session?
Well, I'm excited about the possibility. I think everyone now realizes on both sides of the aisle there's just so much as far as tax dollars that we've paid to the federal government that we can bring back here to benefit Virginians. It'll also help our budget because it'll offset a lot of costs that we have right now. So I'm very hopeful. I'm really glad to see the bipartisan negotiations and people trying to find ways of making it work as we move forward. So it looks pretty promising, looks pretty good. I know a lot of us will be pushing forward and wanting to have some kind of deal this session.
Now there's a healthcare initiative that just passed the Senate, I think Senator Donovan, which focuses on a much narrower population, but helps to finance that with a bed tax through the hospitals. You probably haven't seen that bill yet, but you will be faced with voting on that, I assume, if it gets out of committee at some time. Do you have any opinions about that piece of legislation?
Yeah, so my background actually in healthcare administration, and I sit on the health committee, so I'll be taking a good long look at that. The provider assessment tax, some people have nicknamed it the bed tax, is not necessarily the worst deal for hospitals. I know hospitals maybe don't want to pay that, but if what's best for Virginia and Virginians, if the hospitals need to chip in a little bit more to offset so taxpayers don't have to pay, I've been open to that in the past, and I'll take a good long look at that and figure out what math that makes the most sense. I'm always open to looking at ways we can solve some of these big problems in a bipartisan way.
Who are we talking about as recipients of the current Medicaid program? Women, children, the elderly primarily, I believe, comprise that basic population.
Yeah, so it's usually mothers, children, the elderly, and the disabled. And we have some of the most stringent qualifications in Virginia of any state in the country. And so there's a large swath of folks who fit in this kind of donut hole. They don't qualify for federal support, for subsidies, healthcare.gov, and they're not poor enough to qualify for some support here in Virginia. So they're actually being penalized, many of them, for working. And it just doesn't make any logical sense, and we've been arguing that for some time. So let's make sure everyone's covered. We got to pay for this stuff anyway when people go to the emergency room or they let things fester. We're the richest country in the world, and we should figure out ways to solve these problems once and for all.
Now, I think it was about a year ago, I think you authored an article or gave a speech giving 9 reasons why business should support single payer.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of, it just makes a lot of fiscal sense. Why are we spending all of this money on an insurance industry that really doesn't offer a whole lot of value to the system? And so if you went to a single payer insurance, it's a health insurance system.
That would be like Medicare, for example.
Like Medicare for all. And the actual providers would continue to be private, but you centralize things and you cut out immediately 20% plus in profit and overhead. It just doesn't make sense for something that's so important to our economy with costs growing that we are not trying to take a comprehensive approach. So maybe that's a bigger conversation for a later day for sure. In the meantime, what we can be doing is making sure that we help a whole lot of Virginians that are hurting in Appalachia and inner cities alike.
What about the opioid crisis? Has it hit your district or the valley in general?
Yeah, we've seen a sharp increase in the number of deaths related to overdoses. And it's very, very unfortunate. Of course, it's so cheap to be able to get a quick fix, and just a dusting of fentanyl and can cause quite the overdose. If you come into my office right now, I keep Narcan as an example of, hey, look, just there are little things that we can be doing. But in the long run, we've got to be thinking about some of the major issues that kind of feed into all of this. And without going too deep into it, I mean, I believe socio-emotional development in young children gives them the resiliency to make better decisions later in life. When we talk about, you really have to discuss what poverty's role is in addiction problems, and making sure that we have proper mental health and other supports that are part of a comprehensive approach in doing all of it.
That's a good point, especially in terms of the kinds of trauma, both mental and physical, that youngsters experience at home that cause them to act out in school, for example. We've had some school discipline bills floated this year. Where are you on those?
Yeah, we had a great bill. I think it formed a compromise, House Bill 1600, which is saying the children who do really awful things are expelled, and they probably should be expelled. But children who are acting up, you shouldn't suspend them for up to a year. You know, the Constitution of Virginia says every child, not just all the good children, every child deserves a fair education. And so as long as a child is not, you know, causing immediate harm or doing something very difficult to be able to stomach, we've got an obligation to make sure that that child gets an education, and sometimes, you know, means that we have to put more resources into the child.
I believe the Futures Caucus will, among other things, focus on the high cost of a college education, for example, as well.
Yeah, high cost of a college education, figuring out ways that we can promote kind of the gig economy where, you know, the four-year degree doesn't work for everyone. And there are great ways of having very successful professions that may not lead you down a four-year path.
And our community colleges play a big role in that. I mean, there's a big need for people who are experts in cybersecurity, people who want to be welders, plumbers, electricians. So that's where our community colleges really come into play.
And the Commonwealth has really stepped up. We've been able to provide a lot more workforce credentialing funds to our community college system. I think they're going to be and are the backbone for a lot of these new programs. So we've got relatively low unemployment in Roanoke, but there are a number of jobs that are open, a lot of jobs that are open. We just don't have the skill sets that match. And so we need to work with industries, work with companies to figure out what can we be doing more.
Privileges and elections that you serve on has been busy as usual this year, maybe a little bit busier given the two anomalies that occurred with reference to the recent elections. You had the election that was decided by a drawing. We had another election that ended with the Republican being the victor, but there were a lot of questions raised about split precincts. What's happening with those issues?
Well, I put in a bill to try to tackle the split precincts issue. For example, my district 2 years ago, I didn't have any split precincts, but then the locality changed the precincts, and now I have 6 split precincts. Well, that can be confusing for folks, even those working the elections, which ballot to give out and to ensure people are casting the right ballot. We saw that in House District 28 with Josh Cole and Delegate Thomas's race. We need to just make sure that people feel good about the election integrity. We have over a couple hundred split precincts all across the Commonwealth. And I think we could do more to extremely limit that so that way it's not confusing.
Now, what about the election that ends in a tie?
Oh yeah, lots of different thoughts on that from a lot of different people. Should we have a new election? Is there a different way to go about doing it? I can't come up with any other solution other than potentially having a new election. That probably makes the most sense for a lot of folks. But I will tell you this, there's something really neat about being in a country where we have enough confidence in our election system and we are so organized that we can have a tie election and people recognize it as a tie and we have a sequence of events. What I mean by that is I've worked in third world countries where if you ever had an election that was anywhere close, you're going to have people marching in the streets. So while it was kind of sad in one respect because my friend didn't win, there was something beautiful about living in a republic where we have that kind of beautiful election system that allows for people like me, even a child of immigrants in Southwest Virginia, to be elected.
Well, hopefully we can retain that faith and confidence. What was it just yesterday that there was a hearing on Capitol Hill where the NSA, the CIA, and all of the intelligence agencies testified to the effect that the Russians continue to meddle in our elections. So hopefully that faith can be maintained.
Well, we've got to do everything that we can to restore that integrity, and I take that very seriously, sitting on the Privileges and Elections Committee myself. And I know a lot of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle feel the same way.
Got about a minute and a half left, and there was another issue that you pursued this session in terms of the Equal Rights Amendment on privileges in elections. Why is that still a viable issue at the state level?
After the 2016 election, we saw people rise up from all walks of life, and it was beautiful and mostly positive voices, and it's mostly led by women. And women are taking back their voice and reclaiming, what I think is an important voice in our society. And here's something really easy. How about we just state women are equal to men, and we enshrine that in our Constitution? I don't know why that's so difficult and why there's pushback there. So for me, as you might have seen in the Privileges and Elections Committee, the Equal Rights Amendment was not being taken up, but I made the motion for us to take it up and talked about why, now as a father of two young daughters, I want them to know that they're going to be able to stand side by side with anyone. And so we as Virginians should be able to send that message.
Great. Well, keep up the good work. Good luck the rest of the session.
Thank you, Woody.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I am Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.